we've got a bit of an unusual situation. Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region dropping chaff, small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
So let's say we were doing geoengineering because we wanted to make the weather a little bit better.
There will be monsoon failures during that period, there will be huge hurricanes. The global studies indicate there will be some impact on precipitation patterns.
Might involve large-scale regional agricultural disruption lasting a number of years.
Potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
That the aerosols can, at least in these model simulations or indicated by these simulations, can offset most climate change in most places most of the time for both precipitation and runoff, but it's likely to cause some damage in some places.
Has been the aluminum in the vaccines. I wrote several articles about the effect of the adjuvants in vaccines, including the mercury and the aluminum effect. Then I found some articles about the chemtrails, and there was a lot being said about it, and I wasn't too sure whether it was true or not, because in my state we rarely saw them. But as I started looking on the internet, and I would see these states in which there were these crisscross patterns, and they were very tight patterns, and these geometrical shapes, where it was obvious it was a purposeful covering of the atmosphere with these patterns. And the trails were so long. Well, now, we're starting to see them in my state, and as I look at them, they go from horizon to horizon. Well, I've been alive long enough to know that jets never did that in the past. And I see the same patterning effect now where they're crisscrossing. It's an obvious pattern. And so I looked into the literature and some of the reports and YouTube videos, and they were saying that they were dropping one of the ingredients was aluminum. Well, I had done a fair amount of writing and research on the effect of aerosolized chemicals in the nose when you breathe them. And what we knew was that these particles tend to travel along the olfactory nerves, which are the smell nerves in the nose, and it travels directly to the part of the brain that has to do with memory and emotions, the hippocampus, the entorhinal area, and the prefrontal cortex, and that you can trace these chemicals traveling along that nerve and depositing in this area of the brain. The other thing that was known is that if you aerosolize aluminum, it's one of the metals that passes very easily along this track and directly into the brain, so it bypasses the blood-brain barrier and goes directly into the brain and accumulates. Well, if you do it in animals, it produces lesions or damage in that area of the brain, and the animal will begin to show changes of memory and learning and emotional changes, and the levels continue to accumulate. So we have compelling evidence that aerosolized aluminum alone will enter the brain and produce damage to that critical area of the brain. The worst of all is the nanosize. Now, nanosize means you make it such a small particle that it easily penetrates skin, it penetrates barriers in the body that normally metals cannot pass through. When you nanosize and produce these incredibly small particulate matter, it passes very easily. So when you nanosize aluminum and you use it in these aerosols through the nasal passages, it enters the brain in very high concentrations. And they find that the nanosized aluminum in the brain is infinitely more toxic. Now, one of the toxic reactions to aluminum is intense inflammation and activation activation of cells in the brain that are the immune cells called microglia. Aluminum is a very potent activator of these immune cells, and that triggers the release of a powerful substance called glutamate, which is an excitotoxin. It causes cells to die from an excitatory mechanism, kind of complex mechanism, but it is a combination of inflammation and excitotoxicity. And I coined the term in the medical literature called immunoexcitotoxicity to describe that process. So we know that occurs. We know it occurs very easily. Now, the reports are coming out now that what they're spraying is nano-size aluminum, and the idea is the whole concept of preventing global warming. And they nano-size the aluminum so it'll stay in the upper atmosphere longer, supposedly as a reflective compound, metal. The problem with that, even from a climatologic description, is that if you make it into cirrus-like clouds rather than reflecting it upward and out of the atmosphere, it reflects the heat downward and actually causes global warming. So you could envision that they're doing this on purpose to make the atmosphere heat up so they can see the atmosphere is warming up. But what I'm concerned about mainly is the medical effect, and that's because of this very strong connection between aluminum passing through this pathway into the brain is so strongly connected with Alzheimer's disease and other diseases of memory. If you're aerosolizing this and spraying literally tons of it over the world, and people are constantly breathing that aerosolized nano-size aluminum, which will easily penetrate filters in your air-conditioned system, enter your home. So you're breathing it 24 hours a day, producing high levels of aluminum in this part of the brain, and the consequences could be absolutely devastating. It could cause a huge increase in Alzheimer's disease and inflammatory neurological disorders. Now, I watched YouTube, which was a geoengineering conference that the government had put on. And in the conference, one of the questions somebody in the audience asked, well, what is the medical effect of spraying aluminum in the atmosphere? And the speaker said, well, we don't really know, but we're in the process of researching that. Well, of course, that was an absolute lie. We do know what it does. But the fact that they were admitting that, in fact, they were going to spray, they gave it in the future tense, that they were going to spray aluminum. The evidence now from the examination by biologists and scientists around the world is that the aluminum level in the lakes and streams and trees is increasing enormously. Some areas have incredible elevations of aluminum in the groundwater and in the vegetation. So if this indeed is happening, we're looking at a medical catastrophe.
Well, they say the government is dumping chemicals on us to control or manipulate the weather. And they say the unusual-looking jet trails in the sky are actually chemical-laden chemtrails. It's a belief gaining popularity here in Colorado. So, is there really poison in the sky? Fox 31's Heidi Hammett investigates. Poison?
Who paints the morning sky?
Lines in the sky.
Brilliant, bright white blues.
Strange circles.
What chemicals they use, I do not know.
Peculiar patterns.
And I saw grids and grids, planes flying back and forth.
For thousands of people in Colorado.
I think they're spraying chemicals.
Across the country and around the world.
It's scary. It is very scary.
It is a mile-high mystery.
They say when you see those jet contrails in the sky that don't disappear, that's proof that the government is using planes to spray chemicals into the atmosphere to manipulate or control the weather.
turning normal jet contrails into chemical trails or chemtrails.
Because they're using government planes that are unmarked.
And while some call the concept crazy,
So when they say, no, there's nothing going on, I don't believe that.
Rosalind Peterson says it's anything but.
I think that this is terribly serious in the United States.
The former USDA crop inspector, who was invited to speak at the UN Conference on Climate Change in 2007, has been tracking the government's research on weather modification and something called geoengineering, a way of fighting global warming by putting chemicals like aluminum and barium into the atmosphere to create clouds which reflect the sun's rays.
Geoengineering is to make a change which is unnatural.
She says the suspicious-looking sky shows the government is already experimenting with the weather. And that's why health department records show a sharp increase in barium and aluminum in California's water supply.
Why would we be finding barium and aluminum and other chemicals in our drinking water and have man-made clouds persisting for 20 hours or more?
That's why Golden says we will soon see more weather modification programs, including geoengineering, in the near future. The U.S. Senate right now calling for more weather modification programs. And while scientists say it's one way to reduce greenhouse gases, opponents say the consequences could be devastating.
All of these things change the growing cycles.
Peterson says altering the amount of sunlight that hits the earth will lead to damaged crops, dead and dying trees, and the disappearance of honeybees.
Then I think we're going to be in more trouble than ever before.
So is it a contrail or a conspiracy? No matter who or what you believe, thousands of people are left wondering, looking to the cloudy skies for an answer that is clear. Heidi Hemmett, Fox 31 News.
Well, the U.S. military has been known to manipulate the weather in the past. During the Vietnam War, they used cloud seeding to make it rain over supply routes used by the North Vietnam.
Let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter, effectively to increase the Earth's reflectivity, reducing the amount of heat that's absorbed by the sun, and therefore exerting some overall cooling tendency on the Earth.
I think, though the initial results of climate models indicate that reflection of sunlight away from the Earth can offset most climate change in most places most of the time. But it will damage some places.
We've mostly thought about sulfur, and nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere. There's a bunch of papers going back to the 70s that look at the radiative and ozone-destroying properties of alumina in the stratosphere, and those make you think it might be useful. Do this in just a jet in a very simple way. Make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying alumina vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly, in principle.
What you're seeing right there is two chemtrail planes chasing after another plane. Here's a couple of French planes. These planes will show you how aerosols can be turned on and off. Very obvious here. The plane just turned on the aerosol spray. The other one had it on. The other two have nothing coming out at all. And this is obviously an aerosol of some kind. There, that plane turned it off. That plane turned it on. All four planes are flying. All four have an exhaust. Yet, now here you've got two planes spraying, chasing another plane. The other plane is in the middle to the right a little bit. You can see it there. It's a small dot. Same speed. The altitude's probably exactly the same, or possibly the altitude of the plane that's not spraying anything is higher. Now, you know, a lot of people, pilots, everybody else will come on board and they'll say, well, it's just a contrail. It's just normal exhaust. Well, there you've got the plane stopped spraying right there, and the other plane continues to fly. Okay, Mr. Pilots and debunkers, where is that other plane? Did it just turn the engine off? I don't think so. It stopped spraying. So they started to spray right there. Does that mean that the temperature suddenly changed there? And, oh, wait. Okay, the temperature changed there. Oh, wait. But the other plane's right at the same altitude, and it's still spraying. No temperature change happened there. That other plane stopped spraying.
there is a growing citizens movement demanding an explanation of chemtrails.
And I talked to my NSA buddies at Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and Buckley, where I was actually their doctor taking care of the pilots flying and spraying the chemtrails. So I know it's real. If anybody says
it's not the same as conducting some localized test for some defensive project. This is open air operations. It's not a test. This thing is in place.
Talking about this a few years ago was extremely dangerous. Now that we have YouTube and more social networking devices, this is really getting out in such a way that they can't control a thing over this, because they can't control people now talking about the elephant in the room, what is so obvious to all of us.
There's a feeling from that area that the state doing all of these weather modification programs might not be doing it for the benefit of the citizens of Texas and other states that they may impact as well.
Well, many of the planes that we're seeing here in Abilene will actually turn whatever they're spraying on and off right before our eyes. I mean, you'll see a plane up there flying like normal, and then all of a sudden it starts spraying. We've seen them fly off into the distance and then loop around and fly back again. These are not your typical planes with a preordained path destination from city to city. Someone needs to explain to me, why do they stop traveling in one particular direction and then loop around and come back again? They perform this behavior so many times that we start seeing the tic-tac-toe grids in the sky. We're witnessing the giant X's. And I mean, Rosalind, when you and I grew up, these contrails naturally dissipated in a few seconds or perhaps a minute max. But these things expand, they grow bigger, and before you know it, the entire sky is overcast.
That's correct. And they are there all day. They do loop the loop around our county and our state. We follow them at times with spotters in different areas, watching the planes loop, come back around. And we know from the FAA records that the jets from commercial airlines fly in straight lines. And coming across our county, there aren't many, and they stay mostly in certain patterns. The jets that we see leaving the persistent jet contrails move in directions that normal jets wouldn't fly because it would use too much fuel and put them off schedule. And the jets that we see here do loops. We've got pictures of them looping the same X's and crosshatches. But I believe that some of that, not only are they looking for keeping something in the air almost all the time, but we feel that some of the markings are to mark the start and stop areas for their programs so that they can watch their experiments either from satellite or the ground.
Substance found by a Southwest Arkansas man being part of a barium found in our sample. We decided to contact the Louisiana
437. Предполагаемая продолжительность никто не может скрыться.
Play you back the recording that when I called NASA yesterday and I spoke with someone in your Washington, D.C. office, I was told that he's scared to death. He's going to denounce his citizenship and go back to the Philippines.
Okay.
That's what I was told by NASA yesterday when I called.
Okay. And
Directly from your office.
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Well, I'm sorry?
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Are you recording my conversation with that knowledge, sir?
No.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm not recording any conversation.
You're not recording any conversation with my knowledge, and NASA isn't either, and you can't get through it anyway. If you want to leave a message, it rings and rings and then hangs up on you. Same with Wallop Island. So I would love to leave a message there. Could you give me a direct answer? Because it says you're the scientist here on the NASA website.
Yeah, I'm involved in the project, but...
You are a scientist, so then, and you know that this is experimental, you've never done it before?
No, it's been done in the 1970s, it's been done recently in the 1990s and 2000s.
Oh, that's not what it said on this article here.
3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
It hasn't been done since 1970, the lithium release in the daytime.
Why would it be done now then, sir? That's scary.
Detailed information. If you could please send your comments by email.
Okay, will you respond to my email if I send them?
Happy to answer them, yes.
You will. Okay, what was your email, sir?
Douglas.e.Rowland, D-O-U-G-L-A-S.
Douglas. I'm sorry?
E.
Uh-huh.
Rowland, R-O-W-L-A-N-D.
Uh-huh. At,
NASA.gov.
I'm sorry?
NASA.gov. NASA.gov.
Okay. Well, I will be expecting an email back from you then, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very important we communicate what we're doing to the public. We're very interested in making sure everyone knows what we're doing. We're not, we're a civilian space agency dedicated to science and research and so on. So we're very, very keen to make sure that the taxpayers know what we're doing and everything. So.
Well, you know, when the article came out in the major newspapers, including the Huffington Post, there was no mention of lithium, not one. Not one mention of lithium. Until I heard the recording of the actual, I listened to it. I listened to the rockets go off. I had no idea there was going to be a lithium dispersed until I heard payload, lithium, dispersed.
Good indicators of chemical deploys. And lithium on Ontario Improved Divine have been deployed.
Okay.
RSO TDOSS request to declare the area clear and release the roadblocks.
TD concurs if RSO does.
RSO concurs. All right, copies. Yeah, science team reports out that they do see the lithium trails. These lithium trails allow them to look at the winds and that of the ionosphere. And these winds are believed to be the carriers of the dynamic.
Well, make sure everyone knows that we see the lithium from the airplane.
Roger that.
We've got good sine waves on the electric field.
PI copies.
Right. There was lithium dispersed, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. I think you might be under some misconceptions about what we're doing, but I'm happy to tell you any details that you need.
Well, I know that it says in your article that you're doing it for communications.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. There are many reasons we're doing it.
Okay.
We don't understand how the wind in the upper atmosphere moves.
Mm-hmm.
In these chemtrails, there's different kinds of chemtrails, as you probably know. Different trails at night we use and different trails during the day. The wind blows them around. They glow either on their own or from scattered sunlight. We take pictures and we can see how the wind trail moves around and use that to infer what the wind is. Just like if you were taking a picture of an airplane contrail, you can use that to see how the wind was blowing
what is the purpose of knowing what the wind's going to do in the ionosphere?
The purpose is the ionosphere is really to understand our planet. It's very fundamental science. We're trying to understand every day. We know there's electric currents that flow over the head. They're just naturally there. They've been there for, ever since the Earth had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. And the wind is driven by the sun. The sun heats the atmosphere. The wind blows. And every day that wind drives an electric current. And we're trying to understand what causes that. Essentially, how does it work in detail? And also importantly, when the sun becomes active with lots of sunspots and lots of magnetic activity, that changes the wind pattern and changes the electric current. So we want to understand both what it is on a regular day when there's no solar activity, and then what it is when there's a lot of solar activity.
Is there some other kind of a way that you can use it without dispersing the lithium?
We're researching other ways. The lithium is actually harmless to the environment, and we could show you more about that. But it is tricky to use because it's very faint. You can't see it with your naked eye. You have to, have special cameras to see it and so on. So we don't like to use it for that reason. It's hard. In other words, it's hard measurement to make. We're researching other ways to put sensors directly on the rocket to measure the wind, and those are ongoing. We're trying to develop those now. In fact, one of the purposes of this mission was to do that.
Okay. Well, you've explained it to me then. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate you explaining it to me.
Email too if you have detailed questions, anything you want.
Okay, I will. I'm gonna research it a little more, and I will email you. And I appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me today, sir.
Get your call. It's not often we get to hear from members of the public and people who are really interested and concerned with what we're doing. And I really appreciate your time.
I wish more people would call. I really do. I've called my senators. I've called my governor. You can't get through to anyone, sir. You can't get through to anybody.
Yeah.
I go to my city council. I live in rural North Carolina. They don't care. They laugh you out of there. There's no other recourse for us, sir, unless to talk to people directly and find out what is going on, because we're paying for it. Just ask for the science department.
Well, I don't know what department they're in, but Larson, L-A-R-S-E-N, Miguel Larson is the lead, and he would be, as a government agency, we would not be allowed, to do anything that would be harmful. So he's under strict controls and that sort of thing. So he can explain it to you. He can even show you around, that sort of thing.
My statement was that it's criminal, and whoever's doing this should be charged with a criminal act. That this could kill thousands, if not millions, of people eventually. I mean, if you're inducing Alzheimer's disease on a worldwide scale, and you're inducing a number of diseases just from breathing it. I mean, within the lungs, you can produce asthma, you can produce chronic lung disease. People who have pre-existing chronic lung disease will precipitously get worse because aluminum, as it enters the epithelium of the lungs, is going to produce intense inflammatory reactions, and that's going to produce a worsening of their pulmonary conditions. Also, the aluminum is absorbed into the bloodstream, can be deposited in the heart. People with heart failure would get worse. People with hypertension would get worse. Numerous diseases could be precipitated and worsened by such an insane policy. But it is criminal. It's a criminal. I was asked permission to do this. This was not announced publicly. This was not entered into a public forum, so these health issues could be discussed. They just secretly have done it on a worldwide scale of an enormous proportion, dropping hundreds of thousands of tons of this product in the atmosphere. Well, the skeptics usually are people who are involved with government somehow, and that's their job. Their job is to debunk it. The problem is that we have people who are trained biologists who are taking water samples, like you say, from lakes and streams. We have biologists from all over the world that are sampling it from the leaves of trees and plants and the fauna in Hawaii, in the Pacific Northwest, in Arizona. So they're doing it all over. All of them are finding the same things. And of course, we have records of the levels of aluminum in the lakes and streams and vegetation that go back many, many decades. And so it's easy to compare. And what we see is over the last 10 years has been an astronomical increase in the aluminum, not just a minor variation it enters the streams and the waters and the plants, there's no way to remove it.